Start.
Welcome to Matan's webinar with Rabbi Ruti Regan, B'nai Mitzvah Ritual for Adolescents with Disabilities. I am Meredith Polsky, National Director of Institutes and Training at Matan. We're so glad that you've joined us for this portion of our webinar series. Ruti does webinars about once a month as the Rabbinic Disability Scholar in Residence for Matan. If you'd like to learn more about Matan, please visit us at matankids.org, and we would be happy to chat with you. And I am happy to introduce Rabbi Ruti Regan.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Rabbi Ruti Regan, and a lot of what I do for Matan is look at the disability knowledge that exists in various spheres, parent community, professional community, special needs community, adult providers, and most critically, disability communities led by adults with disabilities. And I integrate that with Jewish knowledge, rabbinic knowledge, and think about how our communities work and how those things together can make us the community we want to be, integrating everything we know. So today we're going to talk about the B'nai Mitzvah ritual for adolescents with disabilities, which is something that I've seen really powerful things, but the power is not always an expression of our values. And I've also seen a lot of people cut off from community, not having access to appropriate bar or bat mitzvah ritual. And I've heard from a lot of rabbis, cantors, parents, and bar and bat mitzvah tutors that they're really not sure what to do with B'nai Mitzvah ritual for kids with very significant disabilities. So I think that one of the challenges in adapting B'nai Mitzvah ritual is that we have really strong normative expectations about how bar or bat mitzvah is supposed to work. In most of our communities, we have this normative ideal that kids are supposed to read Torah, kids are supposed to read Haftorah, they're supposed to maybe lead services, give a speech, have their parents talk about what they did. Maybe they're supposed to do a mitzvah project, and there's often certain involvement from the rabbi, the cantor, and the community. And this is not entirely a bad thing for inclusion. One thing I've noticed is that we have the strongest skills at teaching kids how to do B'nai Mitzvah stuff, regardless of ability, because if we have this expectation that you're supposed to teach a 12-year-old boy whose voice is changing and who maybe has zero interest in music, doesn't know Hebrew, has no talent, and can't sing on key, how to sing in Hebrew with some dignity in front of all his friends, family, and teachers, autism, dyslexia, and other things become maybe a little less scary because we have a lot of different methods for teaching these things. So it's not totally a bad thing, but it does raise certain complications for situations in which we have to do things somewhat differently, or if the ritual might need to change. And one point of failure I've seen is that people like to try and deal with this by dropping requirements. I've heard a lot of people say, well, we don't need to worry about this. Everyone's different. All they have to do is be bar or bat mitzvah is wake up on their 13th birthday. And I think Futurama has a way of responding to this, maybe technically correct, the best part of kind of correct, but, all they have to do is be bar or bat mitzvah is to wake up on their 13th birthday. Really? If so, why do we do this for anyone? Why isn't turning 12 or 13 normally enough? And why has adult bat mitzvah been so powerful for so many women who were excluded from it as adolescents and have found meaning in doing it as adults? It seems to me that the reason we do these things is because they're important and they do things that matter. So if B'nai Mitzvah ritual does things that are important, what kind of things? Okay, and I've accidentally closed my slides, so here. So one reason B'nai Mitzvah ritual is important is because puberty is a really big deal, and we need a way to hold it Jewishly. The kids who are going through the B'nai Mitzvah process are experiencing changing bodies, new experiences relating to their changing bodies, new social and academic demands on them that they don't have a lot of experience handling constructively. Like, this is a difficult age. It's hard to be this age, and it can be very hard to work with people this age, but it's also a really beautiful and important time. There's this growing cognitive and emotional maturity, this growing differentiation. Kids are having this developmentally crucial separation from their parents, starting to become their adult selves and be themselves in the world, really. And this is something that matters and that our ritual does a very good job with in a lot of ways. So for Bar Bat Mitzvah, we're celebrating, recognizing, and mediating the emerging Jewish adulthood. Like, we make fun a lot of, today I am a man, really you're a 13-year-old kid. But in some sense, it's not adulthood, but it's the beginning of adulthood. It's the emerging adulthood, and it's formative experiences that help people become their full adult Jewish selves in a way that's constructive. It's a shift in Jewish status that's really very significant. It's a move towards more mature Judaism, however that's expressed. And it's the beginning of starting to act as an adult in some respects. So some ways this is Jewish adulthood are, one way of expression for it might be leading prayers that children can't lead, laning, giving a Devar Torah that adults will listen to and take somewhat seriously. Sometimes it's being part of stories like, you made it to be Bar Bat Mitzvah, Hitler lost. Now you have to understand that you're responsible for helping Hitler, for making sure Hitler continues to lose by not intermarrying and making sure that your children and grandchildren will be Jewish. Not endorsing or criticizing this, but it's part of the conversation that starts happening in a lot of communities when people reach this age. For some people, it's being allowed to decide whether or not to keep going to religious school, or it can be, moving to a different phase in Jewish education where you have maybe a smaller group and more choices and more agency in how your Jewish education works. Or sometimes one form of expression of emerging Jewish adulthood that I think is nearly universal across Jewish contexts is annoying rabbis and cantors by having a party that we think is inappropriate, immodest, missing the point, over the top. So, people do that in every life cycle ritual, and it's something people are very attached to as an expression of adulthood, for better or for worse. Okay. Immodest, not I am modest. It's an immodest party, not an I am modest party. Okay, just correcting the captions. Okay, so one reason Bar and Bat Mitzvah ritual, which is a very demanding process, one reason Bar and Bat Mitzvah ritual is important is that it's really hard to be a Jew. Our religion is beautiful. It asks a lot from us. Our tradition, whether you want to call it religion or not, because I don't know that's an accurate description of all of it, it's beautiful and it's demanding. And we carry a lot of generational trauma. We still deal with anti-Semitism. We still deal with the complexities of relating to Israel and to being Jews in the world. And it's heavy. And kids who are at Bar or Bat Mitzvah age are starting to deal with that in an adult way. And it's helping them learn how to bear adult Jewish burdens. And that matters, and it's necessary for all of our kids. So thinking about just how demanding this process is, how much we ask of kids. So we expect 12 or 13-year-olds to sing publicly in front of really important people in their lives. And this is an age where that's a lot to ask of anyone, but it's really a lot to ask at an age where kids are experiencing, changing bodies and a lot of associated self-consciousness. And we ask them to sing in public in front of really important people. That's a lot to ask. We ask them to do it in a language a lot of them don't know, including both from the Hebrew perspective and the musical perspective, and to think really deeply about things and talk about the Torah and being Jewish and themselves in public in front of a lot of important people and a lot of strangers. Both are scary. This is really a lot to ask of kids. And they do it. They do it, and it's done because we have a large body of knowledge of how to teach it and how to hold it. So we have a lot that works, and we have a lot of unsolved problems, but we do have a pretty strong culture of problem solving, of developing educational methods, and developing things that will work for our communities. And even though there's a lot of unsolved problems, I have every confidence in what we're capable of creating. So why, and I think that thinking about how to solve these unsolved problems helps to think about not only what we demand, but why and what kids can get out of it. Like what else, also what do we offer? So we give kids respect for their Jewish confidence and accomplishment at a really difficult age. Support in developing their Jewish maturity, affirmation that they matter in Jewish community, and that they matter as people, and that who they are is worth celebrating at an age where other people find them difficult, in which they really may not like themselves very much. We offer a Jewish framework for this changing parent-child relationship and an attentive audience that they earned. We have one way of doing this, actually sort of a range of convergent ways of doing this. But Jewish adolescents with disabilities need these things too, and we don't always either know how to do it or appreciate the importance of it. So I think that when we're thinking about how to create appropriate B'nai Mitzvah ritual for kids with disabilities, we need to think about what it means to have emerging adulthood as a disabled Jew. And part of that is the things that are the same, and part of that is things that are introduced by disability that affect what mediates emergent adulthood. So some of it's recognizing that there's the same need for transition ritual, thinking about how the details of that might be different, and holding that adolescents with disabilities experience a different social reality than non-disabled peers in ways that need to be taken into account. So what do I mean by that? Puberty with a disability has some additional complications. One additional complication is that disability often becomes either apparent or undeniable at adolescence because middle school makes a lot of new demands. Kids who are able to cope with academic and social demands in elementary school often face new barriers in middle school because the demands are different and the ways in which disability matter are different. Middle school is also a time when there's often an increased social demand for conformity, both inside and outside of the classroom, which can mean that there's more rejection for kids who were pretty socially accepted when they were younger. It can also mean adolescence comes with an increased need for an expectation of self-care skills, which are not always readily acquired. Like kids who can't shower independently or don't have good body awareness and can't detect the need to attend to certain things will often have more difficulties when they go through puberty and they smell worse if they can't take care of hygiene reliably. So there's a lot of reasons why disability can become apparent in ways that introduce complexities in adolescence. But also disability can come into existence or be magnified via puberty. Hormonal changes can cause new problems. Being bigger can cause new problems. Medication can stop working either because of size or hormones or other things. Puberty can be the time of onset of seizures. Growing larger can introduce new mobility complications. Puberty is the time of onset of a lot of mental health problems. And girls especially, it's the age of onset for, say, painful cramps or, menstrual cycle migraines or those kinds of things. So it can mean that the changes experienced, in addition to the usual ones for adolescents, can be a move into the social constructed category of being a person with a disability, which is a complicated place to be. Another thing that can happen with disability and puberty, is it becoming undeniable that somebody's disabled and it's going to stay that way, and that they're not going to grow out of it. So when kids are younger, it's often possible to imagine that they will grow out of it, that their therapy will mean that it's something to look back on when they're a kid because in their childhood, but it won't really matter as an adult because therapy will make it go away. Or, that it won't matter so much when they're older because when they're older, they can be a nerdy engineer or something. Puberty is often the point when it becomes apparent that disabled kids are going to stay disabled. And a lot of times people feel like adulthood and disability are mutually exclusive. So for instance, when we say special needs, the next word people think is kids. And there's often not so much of a vision for adulthood. So part of what kids with disabilities really crucially need from bar and bat mitzvah is ritual that makes it clear that they are in fact becoming adults and that disability does not interfere with adulthood. They are the age they are. Their emerging adulthood is significant, it's real, and we need to hold it. So puberty in kids with disabilities, and again, not only in Jewish context, but in our larger culture, it's often treated as though it's meaningless. Like kids will be said, well, physically she's 12, but mentally she's more like a 3-year-old. People even say that of people who are 50. 50-year-olds with developmental disabilities are not 3. And 12-year-olds with developmental disabilities, regardless of cognitive status, they're not 3. They are the age they are, and they have the developmental need for appropriate ritual. But another thing that often happens with puberty being treated as insignificant in kids with disabilities is that they might be treated as though they're incapable of developing sexual and romantic attraction, which can mean that people don't transition into age-appropriate physical and emotional boundaries. Like this is especially a problem in, say, people with Down syndrome are often not only allowed but encouraged to bear hug people of the opposite sex after they've been through puberty, which is a really big boundary problem on a number of levels. Another thing that can happen, puberty being treated as insignificant, is there can be continued enmeshment where parents identify with their kids to an extreme extent that might be appropriate for a toddler or a young child, but isn't appropriate for a teenager who's going through this developmental process of separation. Kids who are reaching adulthood, regardless of their support needs, are not eternal children. And when they're thought of as eternal children, it creates a lot of problems for them, their family, their community. And it can lead to things like parents keeping their kids inappropriately close throughout lifespan, and then really bad things happening when parents die. So like developmentally appropriate separation and communities that can hold that are really crucial. It can even long-term be an issue of life and death importance. So this desexualization can be a particularly large issue for kids who are, gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, queer, questioning, because often it's thought that these are mutually exclusive, that you're either one of those or you're disabled. Youth groups may not be accessible. So just keeping in mind that these can coincide is very important, doesn't always happen. So part of what kids with disabilities need from B'nai Mitzvah ritual is solidarity. So kids with disabilities typically have to fight for their adulthood on some level, and we really need to be on their side in this. We need to create substantive transition ritual that has room for disability and has room for disability and adulthood to coexist. Someone says the screen has interference with other slides, can that be fixed? Let me, you know what, I'll restart the screen share. Is that still happening? People still seeing overlapping slides that are interfering?
I don't right now. I see one slide. I don't know if others feel differently.
Okay. May have been fixed. If it's, oh, it's fine now. Okay, good. So a question to ask when we're designing B'nai Mitzvah ritual, the process, and talking about these things is ask the question, can your community imagine this child as an adult? When people talk about Jewish continuity, can they imagine a future with people like this kid in it? Are there any adults like them in the community? Are those adults treated like adults? So if we say special needs, the next word people think is kids, which is one reason I think disability is a more appropriate word. But even aside from that, do we have room for a Jewish future with adults like this child? What message?
Ruti, they're saying it's overlapping again. I don't see it, but maybe you do want to.
Okay, so let me restart the share and see if that fixes it. Apologies.
Yeah.
Not sure why it's doing that, but okay. Okay, but then said it's not, but anyway, I'm restarting the screen. It should be good in a minute, but while I'm restarting it, I'll keep talking. So I think that the issue of whether our communities can imagine certain people as adults, the answer is often no, and it's not something that will happen naturally or automatically in very many communities because it is profoundly countercultural. Our communities, Jews come from the same culture as everyone else, and our culture doesn't have a lot of room for disability and adulthood to exist at the same time. So I think we should assume the answer is probably at least partly no, and be actively looking for, where is the answer no? Where is it yes? How can we make it yes more consistently? There's a number of things that go into that, but for purposes of talking about B'nai Mitzvah, question we should be asking ourselves is, what message is this bat or bar mitzvah sending about the adulthood of this person?
Yeah, for like half the day.
Okay, someone's not muted. So one thing that's, I think, paradoxically, because we, rightly in Jewish education have realized that there's been a lot of things that have been rote, and we talk about how to bring in meaning, but there's a danger in this concept of trying to make things meaningful. Trying to make it meaningful as a primary goal can end up undermining the solidarity we're trying to build. Because what is going on is already meaningful, thinking about making it meaningful can sometimes imply that there isn't already anything meaningfully happening. So keeping in mind that what we're doing is responding to an already meaningful life transition in a way that holds it and mediates it from a Jewish perspective, I think matters. Don't need to make it meaningful. We need to engage with the meaning in a way that's appropriate. Another pitfall of this concept of meaningful is that ritual that feels meaningful can mean the wrong thing sometimes. When we feel moved, we need to ask, where are we going and is it the right place? Because sometimes we forget to look at the kid and who they are and can end up looking at our own reflection, which kind of defeats the purpose. The name mitzvah ritual for kids with disabilities is sometimes constructed in a way that can feel like pretending. So it can feel like pretending, let's all pretend something meaningful is happening. Let's all pretend that this disabled kid's puberty means something. Let's pretend that they're moving towards Jewish adulthood. Let's pretend that they're doing something real. Let's pretend that something's of real significance is happening, which ends up, sending the message that it's not. And of course, all of these things are true, right? This kid's puberty at Jewish adulthood is tremendously meaningful, important, and real, but it's not always believed. Sometimes people who say that it's meaningful and talk about it feel like they're lying. And we need to talk about the meaning of what's going on in a way that is both true, honest, and experienced as honest by the person saying it and the community. And a way this can play out and end up being entrenched in a way that feels really meaningful is that people can feel profoundly moved by their willingness to pretend. Like they think, this isn't really meaningful. They're not really an adult, but aren't we such a great community for pretending? This isn't a real bar or bat mitzvah, but aren't we such a great community for including them anyway and giving this experience? Giving them the experience of feeling included. Often this feels really good. It feels really meaningful. People get really high off it, but this is not good. Idealized pretending is really degrading to the kid who's a target of it. So what happens is socially valued members of the community get the ritual experience of feeling really moved by how inclusive they are. But then disabled kids get treated as ritual objects rather than ritual actors. Rather than doing a bar bat mitzvah, this kid is treated as an object to give the rest of the community the ritual experience of feeling inclusive, which gives them the message that nothing real is happening, that their maturity is not worth celebrating, and that they will never be regarded as real adults. And sometimes this is experienced negatively as shame or humiliation, and sometimes it's experienced as positive because they're so excluded from everything that this is better than nothing. But either way, when the ritual feels dishonest, it ends up being degrading and undermining adulthood. So we need to watch this and remember that things that feel meaningful can mean the wrong thing. We can feel moved and go to the wrong place. And this is not pretend, it's real. We're not making it meaningful, we're engaging with meaning. So a big part of this is honesty and constructing ritual that is honest about what's really going on and that takes it seriously without pretending anything. So we have to really believe in our bones that something inherently significant is happening with the person you are working with. They're going through puberty. Their adulthood is emerging. This means something. And bar or bat mitzvah affects an important transition that helps them grow into a Jewish identity that's appropriate for adults and a Jewish relationship to their community that's appropriate to adults. It's not just about feeling meaningful, it's about being effective at mediating the transitions that are important. So how do we create effective transition ritual? Well, again, this is all, typically much easier said than done. Much easier said than done, because ritual has to be effective and honest. Effective ritual does things. An effective bar bat mitzvah ritual changes people involved and the relationships between people involved. And we're really good at this in a number of ways. So how do we do this? One pitfall, I've seen this happen a lot, is don't focus exclusively on the spiritual needs of the parents when you're constructing a ritual that is so much about emerging adulthood and separation. So, just like with typically developing kids, their parents are certainly part of it, certainly need to be part of it, but it can't be exclusively about what the parents want, because that would defeat the purpose. When it's all about the parents, developmentally necessary separation ends up being undermined, and the significance of the relationship with the community is as well. And I think in our culture, again, not just Jewishly, it's, a larger culture problem as well. We have this tendency to conflate kids with disabilities and their parents, especially kids who can't talk, especially kids with intellectual disabilities or kids with very high support needs. But kids with disabilities are not their parents, and whatever we do ritually needs to recognize them as distinct. So one way I think that we can do this is there's a blessing in a lot of the traditional liturgy, Baruch Patarani, like, blessed me is the one who has exempted me from this one's punishment, or the punishment on account of this kid. And it feels a little weird because, of course, parents are still responsible for 12 and 13-year-olds and accountable for what they do in some sense. But I think it's actually a really good thing to include in general, and a really helpful thing to include especially when we're working with adolescents with disabilities. Again, because there is a really significant difference between the ways in which parents are responsible for the actions of young children and the ways in which parents are responsible for what goes on with teenagers, and the ways adults are responsible for themselves. And I think it's uncomfortable because separation is unnatural. Like, people want the best for their kids. People usually want to protect their kids, be close to them. This is unnatural and it's difficult. And having a ritual moment that can hold this unnatural, difficult thing in a way that says, it's okay, and the tradition has room for that, I think can be really powerful for anyone, but can really help to mediate some of these problems with kids with disabilities. So another way of recognizing the separation is make sure that you talk to the kid you're working with directly. And this really doesn't go without saying. It's something to watch and to make sure that it's happening on purpose, especially if they're kids who can't talk or whose communication is very unusual, and especially if you are uncomfortable with not knowing how to communicate with them. It can be natural to kind of default to communicating with people who communicate in a way that's comfortable. So it's worth watching. Make sure you're talking to them directly. So, and question that arises is, what if you're working with a kid who can't talk? One thing is, talk to them directly anyway, because inability to speak and inability to understand are not the same thing. And regardless of what people do or don't understand, they understand respect and being treated as a person who has their own perspective. Taking the time to learn their communication methods matters, because a lot of people have more communication than is obvious. And that could be a whole webinar in and of itself about how to do that. I'll probably do it at one point. But in this slide, I just have a link to a presentation I did for medical providers about communication with and showing respect for people with very significant communication disabilities. It's relevant here too. Just have the link in the slides. So it's a thing to be aware of. But important thing, key point of that is that people who can't talk have a perspective and tend to have at least some communication, and putting in the effort to be proactive about listening to them can really go a long way. Another thing is, again, I talked about this a bit earlier, but make sure you're being age appropriate with physical and emotional boundaries. And when people have a speech delay, or are small for their age, or have an affect that you associate with a younger child, this can be very unnatural. So it's worth reminding yourself, disability does not erase puberty. Be careful about not touching people in ways that would normally not be appropriate at their age. Especially, don't do things that would normally be considered inappropriate with an adolescent of the opposite gender. And if they initiate it, don't be mean, but don't tolerate it. Similarly, be thoughtful about what you do and don't discuss with their parents. Because again, involving parents is appropriate, but just like with typically developing kids, you wouldn't necessarily repeat everything. The fact that they're disabled doesn't necessarily mean you should either. Like, just because somebody's autistic doesn't mean you should tell their parents if they come out to you, for instance. So another factor in creating appropriate rituals, shifting gears here a little, is it's important to treat them as obligated. As, being bar or bat mitzvah in the sense of son or daughter of the commandments, having Jewish obligations. And this is something I've seen as a point of breakdown in bar or bat mitzvah ritual for kids with disabilities. Often an instinct is to drop requirements. We have this tradition that it's better to be obligated. Kiddushin 31a, which is often cited when we're talking about women in mitzvot, like women being obligated in positive time-bound commandments or leading prayer, that sort of thing. This text comes up a lot, but it was originally about blindness. A blind rabbi said, at first, if somebody told me I was not obligated to keep the commandments, I would celebrate because here I am not obligated and I do it anyway. But then I found out that it's better to be commanded and to do than it is to just do. And I think that that's part of adulthood, is that we have obligations and it matters whether we meet them or not. We're not doing kids any favors by seeing them as outside of this, even though that simplifies certain things. So one thing I'd advise is don't start by dropping requirements. It's good to err on the side of making sure there's a way to work, to looking into teaching methods for making it work, and also for looking at ways to adapt ritual elements rather than eliminating them. And I can't give you, a general purpose guide to doing this because disability is complicated, communities are different. But what I can say is, put a lot of time into thinking about options before concluding that requirements should be dropped. Because often when there's no obvious way to do it, it is actually possible when people think about different ways of accomplishing it. For example, sometimes kids with dyslexia need to read Haftorah in transliteration. Sometimes people need to learn from tapes. Sometimes kids who might not be able to use speech communicatively may be able to sing accurately and may be able to indicate that they understand what prayer is, learn davening, and lead it accurately. So again, there's a number of considerations, but the first thing is don't start by dropping requirements. Start by asking, is there a way we could teach this? Is there a way we could adapt this that would make it possible? Similarly, if you are in a community where halakha, where Jewish law is a significant concern, don't assume things are forbidden. Ask somebody, who knows a lot about halakha and disability before assuming that there's no way to make something work halachically. I'm happy to be a resource for rabbi questions about this kind of thing, but don't assume it's impossible, don't assume it's forbidden. So another consideration is, regardless of what the requirements are, and it is sometimes appropriate to modify them, it's important for B'nai Mitzvah ritual to involve doing things that are hard. Because, as we talked about earlier, part of what B'nai Mitzvah ritual does is help people learn how to bear the burden of being an adult Jew. Having a disability does not make it easier to be a Jew. Jewish kids with disabilities grow up to bear heavy Jewish burdens as adults. And they have the same need for ritual that can prepare them for the difficulty of being a Jewish adult. And they don't always get it because it can be scary to work on doing things that are hard, and because things that are hard, things that are risky don't feel moving in the same way. They don't feel like this guaranteed affirmation, but they're more substantive and they are worthwhile. But a caveat about doing hard things is that it's not so good to expect kids with disabilities to work 10 times harder than everyone else. Because what we ask of 11 and 12-year-olds is already very nearly unreasonable. And working 10 times harder than that won't help them learn to bear adult Jewish burdens. It will burn them out. And the time and energy it takes to work 10 times harder than everyone else has to come from somewhere. And people don't necessarily have it. So I think it's important to err on the side of modifying and adapting requirements. It's also important, and while it's important for it to involve doing hard things, it's also important for it to involve doing things that are possible, reasonable, and don't result in kids totally burning themselves out. So what if a kid really either can't or shouldn't do all of the usual things? Yeah, for any number of reasons. So how do we still treat them as obligated? One way of still treating them as obligated means keeping in mind being obligated doesn't always mean doing everything yourself. Most of us don't lead prayer all the time. Other people do it for us a lot of the time. So teaching the concept of shlichut, of other people doing things on your behalf and it being meaningfully as though you did it, I think can be crucial in some of these situations. One way to make it real is to involve them in making decisions about who and how some will do the obligatory things on their behalf. And I think teaching that relying on someone else to meet your obligations is really different from being exempt. Being exempt is a separation. Needing help or needing someone else to do certain things is human. It's how we're all functioning in community. We're interdependent. Other people help us meet our obligations. We help other people meet theirs, and it's okay. That said, I think it's important to find something real that they can do. But the existing ritual has a lot of parts. Most people can do some part of it in a real way. We can also create new forms of participation. That's harder, not impossible, but harder. And I think looking at ritual elements we already have is worthwhile. So what does real mean? Real means that the thing they're doing needs to be done. And if it's messed up, it will matter. Real means doing something that would be obviously inappropriate for a young child. You know, if a bar bat mitzvah ceremony looks the same as a siddur ceremony at an elementary school, something's gone wrong, because they're not beginning their Jewish education. They're transitioning into Jewish adulthood, and that those things need to look different and be different, because people with developmental disabilities are not young children, and the difference needs to be clear. And the ritual participation really should involve some sort of real ritual responsibility that recognizes maturity. You know, for instance, you know, carrying the Torah matters because if you drop it, there are consequences. So if somebody is allowed to carry a Torah, that says something about how we're recognizing them as somebody who's old enough to be responsible, you know. And that's not the only example, but it's one. And a lot of people can do that who can't do other things. And we need to do something real and treat it as serious. Another element of this is pay attention to your tone. When disability is involved, it's really easy to, like, you know, slip into these goopy, self-congratulatory, like, you know, syrupy, inspirational tones. Don't do that. It's not respectful. Similarly, recognizing the adulthood of someone with a disability is countercultural in ways that can feel awkward. Interacting with people with disabilities who have historically been excluded can be uncomfortable and feel awkward. Often people's natural reaction to awkward situations is to make cutesy jokes that you know, lighten the mood and make things seem less important. That's not a good look on a bar bat mitzvah, because the message we want to send is something important is happening, not this is awkward, let's not take it seriously. So there's kind of this like picture in the slide of a, like, you know, half smile, self-congratulatory thumbs up guy. Don't be that guy. Be proactively respectful. And again, easier said than done. Don't beat yourself up. Do watch your tone. Part of watching your tone is don't call the paper. Kid having a bar bat mitzvah should be normal, not newsworthy. News articles shift the focus away from the kid onto the community. Nobody really wants to see, like, you know, sure, you did something, but wasn't that so nice of your community to let you? It's not respectful. Like, warm, fuzzy stories about a community's inspiring inclusivity undermine the purpose of the ritual. And there can be times where talking to the media about inclusion efforts are appropriate, but somebody had a bar bat mitzvah is really not a good time. It tends to undermine things. Don't make them look cute. We talked about some, and do something that's obviously inappropriate for young children, but also, like, don't do things that make them look cute or imply that you think they're adorable, which is, you know, good best practices for dealing with kids this age in any case. But, like, don't talk baby talk. Don't call them cutesy things like, you know, oh, my man, this smart cookie. I hear people talk to, like, even older adults with intellectual disabilities that way a lot. And it prompts people not to respect them. And I think we need to be careful not to do that. Don't mock their desire for respect. Like, I've heard a lot of people say things like, oh, he doesn't like it when I call him cute. Well, he doesn't like it when you say that either. Don't do it. Nobody wants to look adorable and cute when they're just emerging as an adult. I remember when I was a kid, like, in first grade, it was okay to like pink, and it was okay to like My Little Pony and Sesame Street and stuff. In 5th and 6th grade, it was really not okay because you needed to prove you weren't a little kid. And then in high school, it became okay again. So just, like, this is such a critical period for people needing to feel like you think that their emerging adulthood and need for autonomy and boundaries is worth respecting. Don't treat it as cute. It really matters. So part of this also, honest celebration of accomplishment. Talk about what they did and your respect for their accomplishments. Be honest. Everyone can do something real. Don't exaggerate or say over-the-top things about trivial actions, because that sends the message that they only have pretend accomplishments and they're not a real adult. It's also, best to steer clear of things like "you're so inspiring." That can just go bad places really easily. Just keep in mind they can do things worth celebrating. Celebrate them. Be honest, because this is a really cool thing happening. So another thing is, if you're on the bima, avoid inappropriate eye contact with the congregation. Again, this is something I'm bringing up because I've seen it across a lot of contexts. For instance, while your student is leading prayers or giving a Devar Torah or something, the congregation should be listening to them and not focusing at you. If you're looking at the kahal, the congregation, when they should be paying attention to your student, it can send the message that you're the one who's really significant in this moment and that they're an accessory. So just model appropriate behavior. Similarly, if you give a blessing or speech to your student, look at them while you're doing it, because distracting the congregation with this kind of inappropriate eye contact prompts them into the mode often of like, aren't we such a great inclusive community, rather than on the cool thing that's happening and on what this kid is doing and the leadership they're exercising. Similarly, and I talked about this more at the Cantor's Assembly presentation, so if anyone's interested in those slides, I'm happy to share them. But music can really send a strong message, and it can make or break whether someone's taken seriously. It sets a mood, it sets messages, it sets like what's important, what's not. So if you're a musician, your skills can really be helpful here. And if you're not a musician, this is a situation in which it can be really helpful to ask a musician for help thinking about how the music's working and what message it's sending. Again, this is an area where like rabbis who have a cantor clergy partner, like partner with them in this because their skills are really valuable in making this work the way it needs to. And if anyone is interested in the slides from the other presentation that go into this in more depth, like shoot me an email, I'm happy to share them. So, and another part of getting your messaging right is having the right assumptions, and a way to train your assumptions to go in the right direction. Like if you want others to believe in this kid's adulthood, it really helps if you believe in it yourself. And a really great way to do that is to expose yourself to the perspectives of adults with disabilities, because it shows you that adulthood and disability are compatible. And this is something that's really an ongoing creative process for everyone, including disability advocates. But if you actively seek out the perspectives of adults with physical, intellectual, sensory learning, mental health, and other kinds of disabilities, it can really make a big difference. One book that's useful is this book, Caring Liturgies by Susan Marie Smith. It's from a Christian perspective, but a lot of what's in it transfers, and it has a lot of really useful principles about designing ritual that does what you want it to do and doesn't end up being self-defeating. So that's a resource I would recommend checking out. And I'm gonna put it back to the first slide and then pause, and then we'll have some questions. Okay, so question asked is, the music sets a message point is unclear. Can you explain a little bit? Sure. This one thing, I guess one example of that is if you sing the Barmi theme song, well, Hagba and Galila, like the lifting and wrapping of the Torah is happening. I think most teenagers would not appreciate that. And most people would, take it as, a cutesy joke or something. And that's kind of a ridiculous example. But, and another example is, so say Birkat Kohanim, like the priestly blessing, is done at a lot of bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies. And it can be done in a tone that like imparts a certain seriousness to the occasion because it's associated with seriousness. If it was done in a different tone, like say to the tune of the happy birthday song, it would, send a message that this is less serious. Did that answer the question? Okay. Does anyone else have a question? Are you available for consultation for ideas on how to create a good experience for specific students? Absolutely, send me an email. So someone else has said, says, I do have a question. Do you want to ask it? So some examples of adaptive rituals. Sure. One example, again, like I talked about this a little earlier, are there ways that people can participate in some form of singing that is ritually significant? Like either by leading prayer, by doing a haftorah, in whatever way. There are a lot of ways to adapt that. That's not a great example. Another adaptive ritual, maybe say like a kid who maybe is an alternative and augmentative communication user might work to prepare a Devar Torah in advance and load it into their communication device and play it that way at the appropriate time, or might use their device to do the Aliyah brachot. And like and if anyone wants backup on it being halachically appropriate to use alternative and augmentative communication devices on Shabbat, I have a tshuva on that I'd be happy to share. Okay. Another thing is sometimes it can be appropriate to have someone carry a Torah and to have somebody else who has spent time communicating with them in a way that is real, saying substantive things about their accomplishments. Again, there are a number of options, and it could go into more depth. It's really context dependent, and I think to be continued. Another question is, I have a question about shlichut, like representative action. You mentioned that it can be meaningful to have people do things on behalf of a student, but is there a danger of people using that as a way of dropping requirements? Seems that we need to be careful in how we present this option and how much it is used. I agree with that. I think that there is a certain amount of danger there, and I don't want it to be an out. I think one way of mitigating that is to create norms in how you teach a class of B'nai Mitzvah students together, and to talk about shlichut, and to have like normalized planning, like maybe students do things on behalf of each other in each other's ceremonies, or talk about significant people doing stuff. So like not making shlichut a concept that only applies to disabled kids, I think can mitigate that some. I think that another way of making shlichut more substantive is having it involve learning the liturgy, and maybe even talking about, like having a conversation about which things you would like someone to have in mind, or I think because that can be, I think that can be a way of making it real. But I do think like it can't just be about dropping requirements, and it can't be an excuse. Okay, any other questions? All right, so.
Thank you, Ruti, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us for this webinar. Ruti's email address, and she mentioned you could reach out to her, is Ruti, R-U-T-I, at matankids, MATANKIDS.org. You can reach out to Ruti. You can reach out to any of us at Matan via info@matankids.org, and we'll let you know about future webinar opportunities with Ruti, as well as other professional development opportunities through Matan. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Now, so as usual, once it's captioned, the recording of this will be on our website. So thank you, everyone.